And welcome to this special How to Thrive virtual workshop. My name is George Liberopoulos and I'm impact producer for How to Thrive. And it gives us a great pleasure to have you all join us here tonight. Now, before we get stuck into our chat, we'd like to take a moment of pause to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians on the many lands on which we meet today, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Now, ahead of the film's release in October, we thought we'd take the opportunity tonight to unpack and understand why How to Thrive was made, but also take an opportunity to explore the central theme of the documentary, which is the science of happiness. And we're here today with filmmaker Duy Huynh and positive psychotherapist McLeod, answering your questions on what makes us happy. Hello, Dee, Marie.
Hello. Go, George.
Now, before we start our chat with Dee and Marie, this is actually a first of a series of chats, and like all good chats, it needs to be two-way. So we would welcome you the opportunity to jump in, leave your questions, any feedback. We'd really love to hear from you through the course of this conversation, and there will be an opportunity for you to jump in and ask questions in the chat function. So jump in and do that at any point, and we'll get to those questions. And whilst you're there, like and subscribe, because we'll be doing this a number of times again in the near future in terms of the live workshops, but also future events as well. So we'll kick off. Dee, welcome again. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks, George.
Excellent. Excellent. Firstly, right off the bat, why did you make How to Thrive, and why now?
Okay, so I feel like this is a subject matter that has been kind of a lifelong question in a lot of ways. And a lot of people don't know this about me, but I'm actually a first generation refugee. So my earliest memories of life was being lifted into a little fishing boat, and we set out to the open ocean and essentially escaping Vietnam. And I experienced personally quite a lot of early childhood trauma, and that's always set some questions for me about what happiness really is. And I look back at high school, and I went to a really rough and tumble high school, right? So it's a really rough neighborhood. And I look back and I recognize that what my contemporary, the refugee kids were experiencing were grief, PTSD, depression, wasn't diagnosed, wasn't really treated. And so for a lot of my life, I felt like I could have done more. You know, I could have done more to help my family, and I could have done more to help my schoolmates when they were having a really tough time. And so that's why this subject is particularly important to me. We've all been through this really collective experience of, struggle through COVID and through wars, and it's ongoing. And I think now is a really good time to start to really unpack what it is that makes us well, and to look at these questions beyond what we currently do in clinical practice. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
And what do you think makes the film so unique? And what makes it sort of, how do you think it's been differentiated from all the other content and films out there related to mental health?
So I think it was really important for us that, yes, the destigmatization of mental health issues, we feel like there's a number of films that have covered those kinds of issues, and the awareness piece it's always really important, and the more we contribute to that conversation, the better. But what really was important to me in this film is that we start to introduce practical tools that people can use. And, film has a really good capacity to help to shape hearts and minds and to create change. And particularly for us, it's about how do we use storytelling to create a situation where some of these interventions, some of the research that has been done in this area gets more mainstream practice and mainstream awareness. Because it's really frustrating for me I've been digging into the research for many years now, and seeing the great work that's been done there, but also on the other side of it, seeing struggle still continue to happen, and still thinking, oh, what if we can get these into the hands of the people that really need it? Would it make a difference, and could it make a difference?
And we need a backstory here, though, Dee.
A backstory. Okay.
We need a backstory. The backstory is very important. Every story needs a backstory. So how did you and Marie end up working together on this project?
So I was at a Positive Psychology conference in Melbourne, and Marie was sitting next to me. We, at the time, I was asking some of these questions, interviewing researchers, and had a lot of footage around research. But like the research doesn't make for a film, and interviews with researchers don't make for good viewing. And really, you need you need more for people to grapple onto some of this subject matter. And Marie, I found out that Marie was doing this incredible work at Headspace in a really small, very underfunded program. Like she'd taken sort of young people who, many of them had very extreme mental health issues. Some of them had attempted suicide, and in a 6-week program, she was able to introduce them to a range of different psych interventions that made a really big difference, like a significant difference to these people's lives. And part of filmmaking is, documentary filmmaking in particular, is featuring and champion work that's really incredible, and this gives me an opportunity to shine a little bit of a light on Marie, and also feature some of the work that researchers have done in this area. So it was a really, and luckily Marie said yes, we can watch her work.
Sounds like a dating story, doesn't it?
We can follow you with cameras for 18 months. So we were very lucky to have Marie, and it's been a really wonderful kind of relationship. Anyway, I won't go in. I'll let you ask your next question.
No, look, I think that's amazing. I mean, it just was meant to happen that you happened to be sitting next to each other, and the conversation got onto, I guess, your passion and your expertise, and the two shall meet, which is fantastic.
There's certainly been a lot of synchronicity about it, hasn't there, in terms of the people that have come towards the project over time.
Sure.
And I remember you saying to me at one point that you went to a film conference, and one of the major things that came out is, what makes good film is a good team. And I think that that's certainly been true for us, is, to have done what we've done, it has required us to have a lot of love and patience and tolerance, and create our own tribe before we could kind of put something good out into the world. And so it was an important meeting, and it has been and continues to be an important relationship between Dee and I and the rest of the team as well.
And the rest of the team.
Well, we've got a brand new 60-second trailer, and I guess it'd be a great opportunity now to share it with everyone that's online at the moment. So let's do it.
Thanks.
I was one of those kids, I don't think I felt that comfortable in my own skin.
Pretty troubled childhood.
I became my work.
We ended up going to family court.
Why am I doing this?
I don't know myself anymore.
I can't find happiness in anything anymore, so I don't know how anyone's going to help me with that.
There's no denying that mental health issues are on the rise at the moment, and the current solutions just don't seem to be enough. With all that we now know about the science of happiness and well-being, could we offer this to people experiencing struggle?
Is there a secret formula to happiness?
It has blown me away how many people are going through the same thing.
You're a great success, Lou, so you need to learn to see that.
It'd be nice.
I have to let go. I realise that this has been holding me back for the last 3 years.
What if happiness is a learnt skill? What if we could teach people how to thrive?
Well, Marie, you had the camera on you for a good year and a half. What were some of the fears going into this project, and importantly, what did you learn about yourself?
Good question. It certainly was a scary undertaking, and I guess I was in equal proportions delighted and terrified at the opportunity. We're both terrified, and maybe that was made a part of a good team.
Yes.
And I think that there's a huge amount of vulnerability for me in exposing myself both personally and professionally in something like this. And I think that it's a very unique experience to have cameras watching what you do every day. And for me, the responsibility was huge around working with people with intense struggle, and then doing that in front of a camera. And it's fair to say that in terms of the application of positive psychology, that has been predominantly used in situations where people are functioning fine, and it's been often used in workplaces and schools with the assumption that people are sort of maybe travelling along at zero, and help them to be well than well or more productive, or the difference about what we embarked on and the work that I'd been doing prior was what happens when we apply positive psychology in the presence of struggle. And that was quite new, and I did and still do feel like that was kind of scary and, a bit pioneering. So there was a lot of me needing to take my own medicine in all of this. Lots of courage, lots of compassion, lots of growth mindset. And, I think we forget, or, when we see the film now, we've deliberately chosen not to show that this was filmed in COVID. But for me, it was already a terrifying prospect. And then when we started it and we took people on a wilderness retreat, kickstarting our process, and when we came out of that and realised that the world was in a global pandemic.
Yeah, supermarket trolleys were, supermarket shelves were empty, and we couldn't get food, and it felt like we'd come back to an apocalypse. Yeah,
and so, but what we also knew was our responsibility was that we'd started something with these people, and it wasn't the right thing to stop. And so then we had to kind of, like everyone else, pivot to doing what we'd planned online. And I was really uncertain about that. I really genuinely believed that it required me to be in the room with people. And so I found that really challenging. And then, of course, I had my children at home as well. And I remember one day when, Dee and the guys came over and set up cameras in my office and said, right, here you go, Marie, this is how you download a file, and you have to kind of clap before you start. And all of these other layers that were to do with the sort of, technology of filming. And that just about, put me over the edge. And I went up to my son's room and I cried and I said, I can't do it. And, there were many moments where you felt nearly broken on the way through. But at the end of the day, for me, always in those moments, I have to come back to why, for the sake of what would I do this? And for me, that's about the potential to make positive impact for others. And I do need to say to myself regularly, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And I just have to keep showing up. And I'm not going to say that that's easy, but I know why I do it, and I just keep sticking to that and being around good people, and here we are.
Well, particularly when you've got the participants and they've committed to the project, and they're going into it with the expectation that this may actually help me. So I guess all the pandemic and changing all that, I guess probably brought the best out of you and the rest of the team as well in that filming. Marie, you've shared with us mental health occurs on a continuum. Can you just share a little bit about that concept? But also, at what point on the continuum could How to Thrive assist?
Thanks, George. So it is interesting to think about, because I guess this also helps us to differentiate positive psychology, which is what we're using in the film, positive psychology and wellbeing science, and other clinical approaches. If you think about wellbeing on a continuum of sort of 0 to +10 and 0 to -10, and we would think that, if our mental health drops below 0 and becomes suboptimal, at the moment what we do is we go to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and we tell them about, what's happening for us. And there is a focus on diagnosing the deficit, the disorder and the dysfunction, and helping people to fix that. And there is absolutely a place for that. But I guess what we wanted to explore is there more? And is there something using positive psychology that can be complementary to that? And so positive psychology has really spent the research looking at what does it take when people are thriving. So when people are living in that zone from 0 to +10, what are they doing? What works to help them to be there? And what we were interested in is, could we take that evidence, that research, and those practices and tools from up there, the 0 to +10, and apply it when people's mental health was suboptimal. And so that is kind of a bit new. It is called positive psychotherapy, and there are people that that are doing that in clinical practice and starting to adopt those things. So we think about the fact that this can help meet people wherever they're at on the mental health continuum, whether they be in struggle or doing really quite well, because we think there's always room to be better. The caveat to that, I would think, is that, if we think about the very hardcore end of mental illness, then, if we are thinking about people who are experiencing psychoses and people who have multiple personality disorder, for example, it's more tricky. And we did have some experience of that along the way, that in those instances it's pretty tough. So we might see that we're thinking about the sort of, the -7 to +7 kind of range is where How to Thrive would mostly sit.
So I just want to build on what you've just shared there. Fortunately, we're in a position where everyone understands the importance of mental health. What do you think we need to do to actually start adapting our behaviours and our mindset to be able to prioritise that day to day?
Yeah, and I think the pandemic has shone a light increasingly on mental health and mental illness, and perhaps a silver lining, I guess, is exposing everyone to the same struggle as an equaliser, and maybe making that a little bit more comfortable to talk about, because there's an environmental context that is creating that. So if we think then about the fact that we are speaking about it more and more conscious of it, then we need to know what to do to maintain good mental health and well-being, and in a sense the kind of rising resiliently through adversity. So I think it's a useful parallel for us to think about our physical health, because we've been for a longer period aware that we need to look after our physical health, and in schools and in families and in workplaces we are very conscious about eating, moving and sleeping well, and the importance of that. But just like one visit to the gym or one piece of broccoli is not going to sustain our physical health, the same is true of our mental health. So it is important that we begin to more universally offer what those tools and strategies are for mental well-being. And that's preventative and proactive. It's not waiting till people are in the river drowning before we sort of pull them out and give them those things. It's about sort of trying to, in schools and in workplaces and in places where people can learn that they know what to do and that they're able to apply those things and hold themselves accountable for those practices in the same way that many of us are mostly good at doing for our physical health.
And I think it's also about that funding priority as well, because at the moment, if you need help, you can't get the level of service that you need when you need it, and ultimately, what I think this film is saying is that we really want people to start to use some of these interventions before they get to that critical stage. And so could these, what Marie does, could some of these approaches be applied in group settings, in schools, in mental health organisations, and bringing people together and solve the problems before it gets more complicated, before it gets more costly as well from a government funding perspective, and a funding and paying for services to be fixed rather than proactively learning this. And so some of my ambitions with this is that we give this to young people at an earlier age, so that it has a really important, and Dr. Becky Kern talks a little bit about life trajectory and she's very invested in sort of this idea that if we provide these tools to young people early, it really has a profound impact on the trajectory of their lives, and that's what I'm interested in, thinking back to the kids at high school.
And I think, to be clear, it's not struggle that's the issue, right? Struggle is a normal part of life, and we can actually grow and learn and be better on the other side of struggle, but it's how we respond to struggle that matters. And what we notice is that, sadly, and this is something that I've learned over time, is that people have not been equipped for dealing with struggle in the way that they could be. And, that is, I guess, what you will see in the film, is that people are becoming equipped and empowered to deal with their struggle in a way that stays with them. And they can use in new struggles, because this is not a panacea. We can't fix life to be all plain sailing. It's like, there will be ups and downs. Just since we've finished filming, one of our participants has lost her mother to pancreatic cancer, and that was a horrible experience for her. And just in the last few days, one of our participants' daughter has been diagnosed with cancer, and it's just awful. But what we are noticing is that despite those terrible things that life throws at us, people are able to continue to apply what they've learnt. And that's, for me, that's gold. And it's one thing for wellbeing to be taught, but it needs to be caught as well, in a way that people can kind of catch hold of that and keep it forever, and keep applying it in new and different ways to whatever happens through the course of their lives.
Yeah, and I really love that idea of actually exposing those interventions to younger children in much the same way. It's a life skill to learn how to swim. In a similar way, some of these skills are actually a life skill to be able to deal with struggle, like you mentioned.
And also that these interventions have, and the message is that they've stayed, because oftentimes when you've got current approaches, if you take those away, sometimes people do descend very swiftly back downwards. And what we've found is actually people have sustained their same level of well-being over time, so 18 months after the intervention's finished. So.
And that has been really extraordinary to observe, to be honest. Like, that's, I certainly don't want to sit here and say that we've got it all figured out, but we have been very impressed with the amazing results that have been happening for me over quite a long period of time.
So, Marie, is there a secret formula to happiness?
Well, it's a spoiler alert, perhaps. We're hoping people will watch the documentary, but you will see when you get to watch it that I've developed a framework called Beacon, and that is an evidence-based framework that is grounded in positive psychology. And we think that's part of the secret formula to happiness, but it is important to understand what happiness is and isn't, because there are a lot of myths about happiness, and people tend to think that happiness is something that they can wait for, and there's this sort of sense of, I'll be happy when ... when I fall in love, when I have a holiday, when I renovate my home, when the weather changes, and the reality is that that's not the case. Those things will give us a momentary lift, but we have this amazing ability to adapt, which is good for us, because we adapt back up from bad things, but it does also mean that we will adapt to those new good things in our lives. So really what we are aiming for is thriving, a more consistent state of feeling good and functioning well. And I think we can share with you now a little bit of the documentary where I speak about this, and it might help to explain that a bit further.
Is there a secret formula to happiness? The first thing I would say is that happiness is actually just an emotion. And like other emotions, it can rise and fall in just a moment. Perhaps a better question is there a secret formula to thriving? Thriving is a more consistent state of feeling good and functioning well. There are 6 pillars of well-being. Belonging. To what extent do you have close connections and supportive relationships? Engagement. To what extent do you feel purposefully engaged in the things you do in your life? Accountability. To what extent do you hold yourself accountable to be at your best, letting go of the things you can't control? Compassion. To what extent do you give and receive compassion from others? And do you treat yourself with compassion when things go wrong? Optimism. To what extent do you feel positive, resilient and hopeful? Nurture. To what extent do you prioritise your physical health? Because we know this has a profound impact on our mental health. Over the next few months, I'll be giving our participants tools and strategies to cultivate and grow each of these pillars of wellbeing and thriving.
So there you had a tiny bit out of the film that explains a little bit about our framework, and we're looking forward to sharing that more with you in the weeks ahead in these sessions, where we'll do a deep dive into each of those beacon beams and get really practical about some of the tools and tips that are underneath that do indeed help people to thrive, maybe rather than the concept of happiness. So really looking forward to that.
Well, I've got some more questions to ask, but we've got some questions that have come through online,
Right.
which I'd love to share with you now. And also, if you've got any other questions as well, please jump into the chat function and put those there, and hopefully we can get through them all. The first question is from Alex on LinkedIn. What was the biggest aha moment when going through this journey with the participants?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I think one thing for me that was really important was, and this is where I had a hunch, but I didn't know, so that's why it was an aha moment, is that we made a decision to really invest in cultivating a tribe around these people, or with these people. And so there is the content, and there is the tips and tools that we're teaching people, but there is also the experience of being part of a Thrive Tribe, as we call it. And that has power and magic in it, in and of itself, regardless of anything that I do or of the content. So for me, when I saw that unfold, I was really... It was an aha moment. It wasn't that it was a complete surprise, but it was like a reinforcement and a happy one. And that's because what I observe in the current mental health system is that people line up one by one, and they go in to see a psychologist, or oftentimes maybe starting with a GP, and they sit there by themselves, sharing their struggle with someone. And I just don't think that's always the way. And I really think that we can think about the power of the group, and that how much connection to others matters. And what we saw happen was that just in the knowing that you are not alone, in those moments where you would see the Me Too moment, we might call it, and that sense of belonging that happened, where the group would hold each other accountable, they would celebrate together, they would cry together, they became very, very vulnerable and shared in ways they never had. That is something that I couldn't do on my own. It is just really quite magical, and it's a really such a sad thing for us to have heard about one of our participants' daughters yesterday and her terrible illness, but it did make me think again that within the very same day of her finding that out, and us not intervening with them and not having super regular contact, that the first thing that she did was reach for her Thrive Tribe. And she said, I know my mental health is more important than ever for me to help my daughter through this, and I'm going to need you guys. And so, yeah, that was a long answer, but I just do think that there's such power in that.
Absolutely.
So, Alex, aha moment for me, I guess, is really the first night. Because when you're making a documentary, you've got this kind of idea that you've got to be a fly on the wall and you've got to be completely objective, and how are we going to be managing story and managing, all of this footage if you're not kind of objective, right? But on the first night, this is something Marie sort of suggested that we do, is we put all of our cameras and tools and headphones and microphones down, and the lighting guy put his stuff down. We sat in a circle and I talked about why this project was so important to us and our own experience of struggle and how we related to the project, and cast and crew. And no cameras were rolling, and it was really important that we had that moment. And the aha moment for me was that you can be a person as well as a filmmaker, and you don't have to be sort of
one or the other.
Shut off your own kind of connection, your own emotion, your own compassion for what's going on, and you can be invested in the outcome for these people without being, without looking at the data subjectively, So.
And without losing objectivity.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think, that's where it did work for us, as a team, oftentimes where we had to kind of sometimes cross over into each other's spaces a little bit, and it really was a joint effort. And I think that it probably comes through in the film in the way that the stories are so compassionately told.
Yes, and that's about the psychological safety bit, right? Because if you did establish that to begin with, then what could happen is that a lot of what's gets filmed feels contrived and it doesn't feel authentic, and because that safety was built in, the group dynamic was established at the beginning, that was that worked quite well. Next question.
Just a comment on that as well. When you're dealing with the mental health subject matter as well, you need to be a good human to be a good director with this as well, Dee. So I think in that
Are you
point
calling me a good human, George?
I am, because I think it takes a lot, I guess, in that moment. I don't know the prelude to that particular situation, but something must have triggered in your mind to think, hang on, I've got to do something different here, rather than feel that I need to be behind the scenes, sort of calling the shots, that you need to be part of the process and get them invested in your story as well. And that they don't feel that they're the only ones that are being focused on, that really it's a story about everyone that's going through this experience in front of the camera and behind the camera as well.
And it is their story, and I speak to all of them very regularly throughout, reinforcing the fact that they can say what they want to, and be comfortable that in the final cut that they have an opportunity to have a conversation with us about how what they want and what they don't, and we've seen. And so they can feel really safe to share what they want to share without it, feeling like, I should maybe moderate what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a state of not feeling judged.
Yeah,
isn't it? Which is psychological safety, and we did invest very heavily in that, and that's the reason, I guess, that we took them on that wilderness retreat. And thank goodness we did, because we didn't know at that time that we weren't going to get face to face again for many months.
Yeah.
But it's a really good model for how workplaces and schools and other organisations could invest in sort of building a tribe and building psychological safety. And
Sure. We've got another question from Kirsten on LinkedIn.
Hi, Kirsten.
Can you share some of the interventions from positive psychology that were tried by the individuals? Example, practicing gratitude and using strengths, etc.
Maybe just one, because we haven't got a lot of time. So, what's your favourite?
Look, that obviously Kirsten has mentioned gratitude and strength, so those are two. I think, the most tried and tested positive psychology intervention is the what went well and why activity. And so we definitely prescribe that early on to get a quick win. And that is really simple. All it requires people to do is to write down at the end of each day 3 things that went well in their day and why they went well. So it is a little bit different from gratitude, because gratitude tends to be a bit more passive. This does require you to think up new things every day, and there always are things, even if it's just that you felt the sun on your face, or as I sort of say, you know, really, even if you just got out of bed and you still had your arms and legs or something really simple, but there's always something when we begin to look, and oftentimes as we start to look, we find that there's even more than 3 things. But it's obviously requires, at the end of the day, sometimes we're tired and we can't be bothered. It's simple, but it is the most researched positive psychology intervention, showing that it's as effective as antidepressants even 6 months afterwards. So we do that activity for about 7 to 10 days. And by about the 5th day, what will happen is you'll notice some things as they happen during the day. And then you'll think, oh, you know, that's going on my list. And what is happening then is that we are rewiring our brains away from the negativity bias that we all have. So we're all wired to look for issues, risks, and problems. That's how we were designed back when we were cavemen and women, to keep us alive, so that we wouldn't be sort of attacked by saber-toothed tigers and such. So really, really simple, really basic, but it is incredibly effective. And what that does is quite quickly flick a switch from, are we focusing on what is wrong or what is strong? And sometimes just that switch in focus can really begin to change things.
And the good news is, at the end of the film, you'll get led to a measurement tool that's available online, and completing the survey online will then give you a customized report on what your well-being looks like, and the tool will also prescribe a number of social activities that you can do that will help to and interventions that you can participate in that will help to address specifically the score that you've returned. So,
and that's exactly what we'll be doing as well in the next or the series of these events, isn't it? As we will be talking today, sort of like a bit of an introduction and who are we and what are we doing and why. But you know, we will begin to get more practical. And my aim in the sessions coming up will be to make sure that you leave with some really practical things that you can go away and do in relation to the topic for that session.
So share to your friends, get everybody coming to these workshops. We'd love, you know, a really good cohort of people to come through. So
we've got about 8 minutes because we're going to get everyone away on time so they can enjoy the rest of their night. We've got a question from Kelly. And I'd like each of you to answer this independently. What impact do you want to see from this film?
Good question, Kelly. For me, it's the doing part, right? So awareness seems to be a little bit nebulous, and it's important, but I think we're at a point now where we actually want people to start taking action. And if, as a result of the film, people do 1 or 2 things that start to shift the way that they think and what went well and why activity, or start to understand and unpack their well-being. Because often when we're not feeling great, we just feel not great, and we don't really have the language and the vocabulary to really unpack that and understand it. So if we can all understand a little bit about the components that make us well, that's important to me, and then that we start to do things around that. There's broader goals around like what happens with the way that we fund mental health interventions, and how we could include more people and you know and service more and provide more in that space and more options in that space. So
I think for me it's about how do we make this more universally available. I think it's still uncomfortable for me because, you know, I don't want to sound like I know all the answers, because I don't. But I've been doing this long enough now to see the difference that it makes for most of the people most of the time, and I feel compelled to keep pushing for more people to know this because of the difference I see it making. And so I would like us to imagine a world where our children were learning this alongside reading, writing and arithmetic, and where workplaces were evolving beyond, you know, EAP and mental health first aid to thinking about the sort of upstream interventions that empower people to thrive despite you know, the struggle that comes their way, and so I think it's about the opportunity to not just have a system that focuses on fixing our deficits, but about equipping, empowering us to thrive despite where we're at on a mental health continuum. So that's my hope, and it's not my magic, but I just happen to be at the moment out there kind of talking about it.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've got time for one more question. And in closing, we've got a question from Misty on LinkedIn. Love the film and love your work, Marie and Dee. Just a question on the Beacon methodology and how people should adapt it to their lives. For someone who would classify themselves as functioning well for the most part, do you recommend implementing Beacon in times of struggle or to keep it as part of your routine ongoing?
That's a great question,
Yeah,
Misty.
we love that.
Thank you for that. Do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, and it is great. And in fact, yesterday I was working with a group and we were reflecting because they had been through the program and they were coming back for a bit of a top up a number of months down the track, and one of them was telling the story about how she had observed herself. She was going along fine, but she just had a bit of a blip, and she thought, my mood and energy is a bit low, and she thought, you know what, I'm going to pull out Beacon and I'm just going to, and she said, I didn't have any paper and I didn't have my book or anything, but I just worked through it in my mind, and I thought, belonging, engagement, is just that I ticked the ones that I thought were fine, and the ones where I thought I needed to do something, I just took a small step. And so for her, that was about texting some people to catch up, and she went through. So I think that, and our participants say as well, one of them particularly always sort of, keeps it by her desk and just sort of use it as a check. And I guess I probably do that myself. So I think that regardless of where you are, it's just a handy reference, and that's what people kind of tell us. And again, this isn't rocket science, but it has seemed to have been packaged in a way that it is more memorable and accessible, and that's what's important, right? Is we need to have something we can just, when we need it, pull it out and go, how am I tracking against these things? So I think, to answer your question, whether you're in struggle or whether you're fine and you just want to kind of check-in point, it's equally valuable regardless of where you are. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, we've had more questions than what we can actually get through on the chat function. So what we can do is, if you want to continue including your questions in the chat function, the team can get to those after tonight as well. I think there'll be a great opportunity to just continue the conversation from tonight. But
so we've got time for one more?
Yeah, we probably can. A very quick one. John from Facebook, is there going to be a sequel, Dee?
Oh!
There's nothing in the works at the moment, but I would love to. I think some of my goals, as I spoke a little bit earlier, is getting it to young people. So potentially reorientating the program to that audience, and potentially to other territories as well, because even though we understand ourselves in Australia, the international audience can sometimes not. And so...
they even understand my Kiwi accent.
Yeah, do they? I don't know if I understand you sometimes.
We need subtitles, Marie.
I do have some funny terms and phrase sometimes, but yeah.
What's that favourite?
What's that all about?
Yeah.
Oh, that was the funniest thing the other night when they'd been teasing me about a turn of phrase, and then my family finally got to see the film, and my dad stood up very proudly, and then he said the exact thing that I had always been saying, and then you knew where it had come from.
The phrase that we could never understand, but anyway, we won't go to that now.
So I think what we speak about is really the fact that we'd like to continue to do things in this vein. I guess we fantasize and talk about that, but I think we've spent quite a long time on this, and we need to make sure that it's bedded down and that we also back it in with really good learning and teaching, and that's what we've been doing and what I've been doing while Dee's been finishing.
And also going to the need as well. Like there's a lot of need in a range of different subsectors. Teenagers and single mothers, and the lots of at-risk groups that we could be targeting and having a look at. This and maybe thinking about the format as well. Potentially, it's a TV series rather than just because I know that there's 18 months worth of footage, right? And there's so much that the participants have learned and so many moments of epiphany that we just can't show, because when you think about 95 minutes in a feature, that's not a lot of time, and that's 6 to 8 minutes per participant to cover their 1.5 year journey, which is extraordinarily hard to do. So,
Well, Dee and Marie, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been really enjoyable. And to everyone that's joined us tonight, just a couple things before we sign off. Firstly, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be doing this again in the coming weeks. So just subscribe to whichever channel you're on, and that way you'll get a notification. And also, the movie theatrically is going to be released in October, but there will be an opportunity on Wednesday, the 3rd of August. If you're Melbourne-based, it's going to be a charity screening for Mary Outreach Support Service, which is a homelessness agency in Inner North. So we'll get some information on the channels, but there will be an opportunity for you to check that out at Westgarth Northcote Cinemas. So thank you again. Do take care, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.